Hello, everyone. Jax West from Stephen Avery Project, MAM Gossip, and Justice with Jax. This should be our last story time on Wrecking Crew, seeing as we are on chapter 27, page 311 out of 361. So I should be finishing in this session. I know somebody just made a post. I think Jen just made a post. We did Ken Kratt's stupid book at one point. I posted the link here. That is the link to where you can find all the live videos. So you can search through there and maybe you can find when we've done the Kratz book and other lives we've done, like when we've taken our field trips to Manitowoc. I did a live video from John Farrick, a book thing that he had done when this first came out. Lots of goodies in there. We can do more story time. So put your suggestions in, or maybe Christopher, if Christopher watches this, or if I remember to say to Christopher, he can put something up, some kind of poll for what would be the next story time y'all would like to do. Doesn't have to be on Stephen's case. There are some books out on Stephen's case that I will not read, that I will not promote in any way, shape, or form. So Kratz's book, even though it's something that, I don't want to publicize or promote, that piece of trash, I did it as like a public service. So people didn't have to give that raper any money. So you could just listen to the book instead of having to pay for it and give that guy any money whatsoever. But there are other books that people have written over the years that are people who are taking advantage of this case and trying to profit off of it. And I'll go into the gossip on all of that. We should be scheduling another live this week so I can talk to you all that I made the decision last week to cancel our rally. This is due to just my personal time and things I have going on in my life that I was trying to make it work to do the rally this year. And I was excited to go, and I had rented this really cute thing, and I just can't make it work this year. So, but I don't want to get into that on this, since this is to read this book, to finish the book here. So we are reading Wrecking Crew. Well, it says Wrecking Crew, Demolishing the Case Against Stephen Avery. It is not written by Kathleen Zellner. It is written by John Farrick, who was a reporter in the Wisconsin area at the time of the case when it was first going on. He's now in Joliet, Illinois, down here by me. Yeah. So, all right, let's let's get to reading and see what time is left over with how long let me get my keyboard out of the way here. To read these last 50 pages. So like I said, we are on chapter 27, titled Damaged. It is page 311 out of 361. So we have 50 pages to go. But sometimes this stuff takes longer to read than you would think. But here we go. When former Mishicot resident Kevin Romlo, we talked about this the last time we were together that I was reading. What was that, Wednesday? That he had been posting here in Gossip. So, yeah. Okay. When former Mishicot resident Kevin Romlo came forward in 2017, he made it abundantly clear that he saw Teresa's RAV4 being concealed at the Highway 147 turnabout near the old dam toward Mishicot. It turns out Romlo was hardly the only person in Manitowoc County who remembered seeing Teresa's vehicle being concealed off the road near the old dam. Quote, I lived in Mishicot in 2005. On October 31, 2005, I was driving east on Highway 147 toward Mishicot when I saw a vehicle by the old dam on the north side of the road. It was around dusk, but there was enough light for me to make out its shape and color, said Paul Burdick, a longtime resident of Mishicot. It was a small SUV, greenish in color. It was facing northwest and parked facing a tree, unquote. However, when Burdick drove past the old dam another time in the coming days, he made another observation. Quote, several days later, the vehicle was gone, he said. I did not report what I saw to the police. The talk around town was that some people in the community called in the vehicle to the police, unquote. However, at the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office, there are no written documents indicating anybody responded to a call of an abandoned vehicle, Teresa's RAV4, being dumped near the old dam. Shocker. Interestingly, Zellner also discovered Manitowoc County's radio transmissions concerning calls and efforts to find Teresa or her RAV4 on Friday, November 4, 2005, no longer exist. Quote, Ms. Halbach's vehicle was observed parked by a tree at the old dam by witness Paul Burdick on October 31, 2005, unquote, Zellner said. Then over the next few days, Zellner noted, quote, Ms. Halbach's vehicle was observed parked in the same location at the old dam by witness Kevin Romlo. It doesn't have unquote at the end there, but it's unquote. The sightings of Teresa's RAV4 dumped behind the tall trees and wild brush along the state highway also point to the suspected involvement of Taduk in the murder, according to Zellner. The distance between where Taduk lived in November 2005 and the location of the abandoned vehicle was roughly a half mile. Provided this was the murder victim's vehicle, then how did it get to Avery's property and why did it sustain front-end damage? There is no denying the fact that Teresa's RAV4 was damaged after she visited Avery Salvage, but nobody in Wisconsin law enforcement made much of an effort to find out why her vehicle was damaged. What caused the driver's side blinker light to get knocked out? Where did this occur? Why did the culprit make it a point to stop what he was doing, get out of the vehicle, and pick up the broken vehicle debris and place it into the cargo area? Photos of the vehicle also make it clear the front bumper was torn as well. A few logical scenarios remain. The killer may have struck an object driving the victim's vehicle after dark, panicked, and retrieved the blinker light. The other scenario is that the police and perhaps one of the searchers, such as Ryan Hilgas, the ex boyfriend of Teresa, were involved in the car mess up. Zellner suspects that the RAV4 may have been moved from the Old Dam turnabout to the Redant sand and gravel pit that Friday afternoon of November 4. And then after dark, it got towed onto the Avery property where it was spotted the next morning. Stephen Avery has told his lawyers he believes the RAV4 had to be towed onto the perimeter of the salvage yard property at some point in time because the vehicle was facing west, meaning it may have been unhitched at that point because the tow driver could not turn it around. Quote, also, the RAV, according to Stephen, is parked too close to the vehicle next to it so that there is not room to exit the driver's door of the RAV for a man to exit, unquote, Zellner said. Quote, Stephen believes the parking light damage was the result of towing, unquote. Zellner has been attempting to gain access to the broken blinker light in order to have it tested. Okay, that's the way it's written. For trace evidence and DNA. But the state of Wisconsin has put up a vigorous fight to thwart her attempts to have the blinker light tested. It is also fighting her efforts to have the pelvic bones undergo testing to confirm whether these charred bones positively belong to Teresa. I'm sorry, it just infuriates me. But, so shows you that they have no interest in finding truth and justice for Teresa Halbach. And it shows that they have no faith in their own narrative and their own investigation, that they need to try and block anything else from being tested. Quote, the parking light on Teresa Halbach's car was damaged after she left the Avery property on Halloween 2005. We know the car was not damaged before Halloween, unquote, Zellner said. Quote, the specific damage was located in the area of the driver's side parking light and is consistent with the vehicle being driven through the Redant gravel pit and colliding with one of the metal property stakes on Redant's property or the red Pinto blocking access to the Avery property. I'm going to guess that's supposed to be an unquote, but it's not there again. Yeah, it's just not there again. Okay. Over the past couple years, Zellner's investigators have tried repeatedly to interview Halbach's ex-boyfriend, Ryan Hilgas, the young man who organized the search party efforts to find Teresa. Hilgas was the individual who met up with Pamela Sturm on the Saturday morning of November 5, 2005. That was the day that Sturm and her daughter showed up late and told Hilgas they wanted to go and search the Avery salvage yard themselves. In turn, Hilgas and Teresa's roommate, Scott Blodorn, supplied Sturm with the camera, and they also furnished her with the phone number to reach the Calumet County Sheriff Jerry Pago. However, Zellner's repeated attempts to interview Hilgas about any facets of Teresa's disappearance and the front-end damage of Teresa's RAV4 have been unsuccessful. Hilgas has refused to be interviewed by Zellner's investigators, Kirby and Associates, she said. Quote, Mr. Hilgas injected himself into the police investigation by taking an active role in the volunteer search, unquote, noted police procedural expert witness Greg McCrary. Quote, he gave a female volunteer a camera and a direct phone number to the sheriff. It appears that he directed her to the area where the victim's vehicle was located. He also appears to have misled police when he told them that Ms. Halbach had damaged the front driver's side of her vehicle months before her disappearance, had filed an insurance claim for that damage, and had taken the cash payout without repairing her vehicle. However, it appears that particular damage was done more contemporaneously with the crime, and a check with Ms. Halbach's insurance company revealed that she never filed an insurance claim for the front-end damage, unquote. On May 26, 2017, the insurance company for Teresa Halbach responded to the subpoena sent to them by Kathleen T. Zellner and Associates. Quote, pursuant to your subpoena, Erie has made a diligent and exhaustive search of its records and finds no such claims have been presented between the years 2003 and 2006 pertaining to Teresa M. Halbach. As such, the Erie has no records to provide, unquote, advised Kevin F. Nelson of the Litigation Claims Examination Department. When Zellner filed her original post-conviction relief on June 7, 2017, the 221-page document outlined a number of Maryland, the court held that the state violates an accused constitutional right to due process of law by failing to disclose evidence. A Brady claim requires a showing that the undisclosed evidence is favorable to the accused because it is either exculpatory or impeaching. The evidence was suppressed by the state either willfully or inadvertently, and the accused was prejudiced because the evidence is material to guilt or punishment, unquote, Zellner's motion argues. Zellner's team uncovered a number of key pieces of evidence that were never furnished to Avery's original trial lawyers, Buting and Strang. One was the voicemail CD taken from George and Jolene Zipperer's home. Quote, when Ms. Halbach first arrived in the vicinity of the Zipperers' residence, she made a phone call which was answered by the Zipperers' answering machine. Allegedly, Ms. Halbach left a voicemail that she could not locate the Zipperer residence. On November 3, when the Zipperers were interviewed at 9:30 p.m., they told the investigators that Ms. Halbach had left a voice message on their answering machine. The voicemail was listened to by Detective Remaker of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office, and it was copied by Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office Detective Dennis Jacobs onto a CD. The CD of Ms. Halbach's voicemail recording on the Zipperer answering machine was never turned over to the trial defense counsel and has allegedly disappeared. Hey, Natalie. Quote, Mr. Fallon confirmed in a letter to current post-conviction counsel on April 20, 2017, that neither Calumet nor the Manitowoc Sheriff's Offices have been able to locate the CD of Ms. Halbach's voicemail left on the Zipperer answering machine, unquote. The disappearance of the voicemail, however, may have something to do with Kratz's professional misconduct, Zellner contends. Quote, suspiciously, Mr. Kratz never played the recording of the 2:12 p.m. voicemail for the jury. It is reasonable to conclude that Mr. Kratz concealed the 2:12 p.m. voicemail because it confirmed that the Zipperers' residence was Ms. Halbach's last stop. Clearly, the destruction and or concealment of Ms. Halbach's voicemail to the Zipperers leads to the reasonable conclusion that her voicemail refuted Mr. Kratz's timeline, and so it was concealed from trial defense counsel. Investigators concealed the voicemail left by Ms. Halbach on the Zipperers' answering machine because it refuted their theory that Ms. Halbach's final appointment was Mr. Avery, unquote. The second Brady violation allegation pertains to Teresa's fuel tank. Quote, although the odometer reading from Ms. Halbach's vehicle was noted at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, no reference was made by law enforcement or the Wisconsin State Crime Lab to the amount of gas remaining in the RAV4's fuel tank, which would have provided vital information about how far the car had traveled since its tank was filled to capacity on October 29, 2005, unquote, Zellner said. Sup, cat? Police obtained Teresa's credit card statements, which show that 2 days before her death, Teresa spent $37.94 to purchase a full tank of gas at the Exxon station in Des Peres, a suburb adjacent to Green Bay. Zellner determined her 1999 Toyota RAV4 had a fuel capacity of 15.3 gallons. Quote, Mr. Fallon has confirmed on April 20, 2017, that the state failed to determine and document the gas level remaining in Ms. Halbach's vehicle when it was discovered on the Avery's property. Clearly, the state did not want the mileage revealed because it would have completely refuted its theory that Ms. Halbach and her car were driven many more miles after she left the Avery property, unquote, Zellner said. A third Brady violation allegation concerns the highly questionable flyover conducted by Calumet Sheriff Jerry Pagel and his investigator Wendy Baldwin. Ugh, I detest her. Their reports showed they were up in the sky for several hours, flying over the terrain and specifically over the Avery property under the guise of searching for Teresa's vehicle. But they may have had ulterior motives. Their flyover may have been a shifty way for them to survey the Avery property to find the perfect spot to put Teresa's RAV4. A video of their flyover was provided to Strang and Buting, but the video they got was only a few minutes long. Quote, Wendy Baldwin and Sheriff Pagel were in the air for around 4 hours. Yet the state produced only 3 minutes of footage, unquote, Zellner informed Judge Angela Suckowitz during the summer of 2017. Quote, Mr. Kratz saw the unedited flyover video and knew that the RAV4 was not there at that time, but knew that the state's case might fail if the RAV4 was not present before 6 p.m. on November 4. The video was intentionally edited to conceal the fact that the RAV4 was not present at the time of the flyover on November 4. Back in 2006, Strang and Buting notified Kratz about the questionable flyover videotape. Quote, We currently have a date and time. Thus, I assume there must be a master copy of the complete videos, unquote, Buting wrote to Kratz back on July 24, 2006. The lawyers for Avery asked Kratz to provide a complete copy in 2006, but that never happened. A fourth Brady violation outlined by Zellner concerned the Wisconsin police investigators maintaining an oath of silence about their knowledge that Teresa's vehicle was driven through the Redant quarry properties. Zellner has an affidavit from the quarry owner who swears under oath that the criminal investigators from the Wisconsin Department of Justice told him such. Quote, DOJ investigators never authored a report documenting their conversation with Mr. Redant about the RAV4 being driven from his property and planted on Mr. Avery's property, unquote, Zellner said. Quote, Mr. Kratz did not call Mr. Redant as a witness at Mr. Avery's trial. The failure to produce this evidence to trial defense counsel was a clear Brady violation because this information could not only have been used to impeach the state's witnesses, it also would have provided exculpatory evidence for Mr. Avery that the RAV4 was planted on his property, unquote. So, and then here's two pictures of the blinker light, one showing that it's missing from the RAV and the other of where it sits in the back of the RAV. Chapter 28, Avery's Brain. Skipping all this stuff talking about the brain fingerprinting in past whatever. I just want to get where it is in Stephen's case. All right, so All right. So here's finally where he gets to Stephen. On May 2, 2016, Dr. Farwell performed his patented court-appointed brain fingerprinting test on the man condemned to life imprisonment for Teresa's brutal killing in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. Quote, the data analysis program that I applied in the Avery case was more sophisticated than the previously available analysis methods, unquote, Dr. Farwell said. Quote, as in every crime, the brain of the perpetrator was central to the phenomenon revealed by the newly discovered blood spatter evidence in the Avery case. The perpetrator's feet stood behind the car. The perpetrator's hands wielded the object and struck Teresa. The perpetrator's feet and hands, however, cannot operate independently. The perpetrator's brain controlled the actions of his hands and feet. The perpetrator's brain is different from the brain of an innocent person. The perpetrator's brain processed the information that 1, Teresa was behind the car, and 2, the cargo door was open when the perpetrator attacked and struck Teresa, unquote. Farwell noted his brain fingerprinting test would detect the difference between the brain of the perpetrator and an innocent person. Obviously, Avery already knew lots of information about Teresa's murder case based on his interactions with her on the day of her disappearance, from his interviews and interrogations with police, and from sitting through a 5-week jury trial in 2007. Quote, Mr. Avery acknowledges knowing all of this. He claims that he knows information about surrounding events only through innocent participation in these events and not through participation in the murder itself, unquote, Farwell said. Quote, prior to the brain fingerprinting test, Mr. Avery explicitly stated that he did not commit the attack on Teresa, nor did he witness the crime. He explicitly stated that no one had told him the specific details of the perpetrator's initial attack on the victim, unquote. Here are some of the key questions that arose during Dr. Farwell's interview. Quote, do you know where the victim was in relation to her vehicle when the perpetrator attacked and wounded her? Do you know if she was behind the car, in the driver's seat, or on the passenger side? Such questions obtained a denial from Mr. Avery that he knew the relevant information without revealing the correct information about the crime. If Mr. Avery did not commit the crime, he would have no way of knowing that the perpetrator attacked when 1, she was behind the car, and 2, the cargo door was open. He explicitly denied knowing these details about the crime on the basis of his contention that he did not commit or otherwise participate in the crime, unquote, Dr. Farwell said. Quote, this test was structured to determine definitively and scientifically whether or not 2 specific salient features of the murder of Teresa Halbach were stored in Mr. Avery's brain. A, where the victim was in relation to her vehicle when the perpetrator attacked and wounded her, and now this is bolded, behind the car. B, the configuration of the victim's vehicle when the perpetrator attacked the victim, and now this is bolded, cargo door open, unquote. According to Dr. Farwell, the probe stimuli for brain fingerprinting test he conducted on Avery were, quote, behind car, unquote, and, quote, cargo door open, unquote. Quote, I told Mr. Avery that he would see a phrase correctly specifying where the victim was in relation to her vehicle when the perpetrator attacked and wounded her, but did not inform Mr. Avery that the correct information probe stimulus was behind car. I told Mr. Avery that he would see a phrase correctly specifying the configuration of the victim. 5 in Volvo S40. The relevant stimuli regarding Teresa's death were a deep stream and a golf club. Quote, For Mr. Avery or anyone else with a basic knowledge of the crime, clearly the target stimuli were correct. Crime relevant information and the corresponding irrelevant stimuli were irrelevant and had nothing to do with the crime. Unquote. Here's what Dr. Farwell told Avery prior to giving the test. Quote, "The perpetrator attacked the victim, wounded her, and ultimately killed her. At trial, one specific attack with one specific weapon was extensively discussed, so everyone knows about the attack, including you. Just because you know about it does not mean you did it, only that you heard about it at the trial. There was another attack with another method that was not mentioned at the trial. The perpetrator knows about that other attack, where it took place, and what happened, but an innocent suspect does not know these things. If you are innocent, you do not know anything about the other attack that took place because you were not there. If you are guilty, you know details about the other attack because you did it. This brain fingerprinting test will determine whether or not you know specific details about this other attack that was never mentioned at the trial that no one ever told you about." Unquote. Farwell's experiments don't make determinations based on a visual inspection of the brainwave data, he emphasized. Instead, he uses mathematics to compute whether the informed present or information absent is stored in the person's brain. So what did he find for Avery? Quote, "These results mean that scientific testing was or has determined with a 99.9% statistical confidence that Mr. Avery does not know certain specific details about the attack on Teresa Halbach," unquote, Farwell concluded. Quote, "The salient crime relevant information which was experienced by the perpetrator when he committed the crime is not stored in Mr. Avery's brain. Specifically, this information comprises the details that were revealed by the newly discovered blood spatter evidence and embodied in the probe stimuli." Quote, "This provides scientific evidence that Mr. Avery does not know specific critical, salient, crime-relevant information regarding what actually took place at the time that the perpetrator attacked Teresa Halbach," unquote. In the case of the condemned Omaha man, going back into this other case, and I'm not going to read the other case. I only care about Stephen's case. As for Avery, his lawyer tells this author, quote, "He was adamant about taking Dr. Farwell's brain fingerprinting test. Mr. Avery believed that the test was 100% accurate in detecting if he was lying. Guilty people absolutely do not request new forensic testing or submit themselves to a test that could reveal their deceptions," unquote. Zellner said there have been countless times during her representation of Steven Avery where he has made it clear to her that he is completely willing to undergo any kinds of testing and questioning if it helps prove his innocence. Quote, "One of the biggest breakthrough moments was when Mr. Avery was so adamant about wanting all of the additional forensic testing done on the RAV4 and any other items we wanted to test," unquote, Zellner told the author. For her, the recent scientific testing upon the bullet that was likely planted on the floor evidence became known as Item FL. Quote, "The second breakthrough moment was the discovery of the wood and paint on the bullet, but no bone," unquote, Zellner said. Quote, "I knew the state's entire theory about FL was false. The third breakthrough moment was the cumulative effect of not being able to replicate any of the state's forensic evidence. All of it was flawed," unquote. But like she has had to do in many of her most high-profile wrongful convictions, which I did see that Dream Killer is on, was it Netflix? But I do recommend you watch the Ryan Hilgas Dream Killer. Zellner will have to win Avery's innocence at the appellate level. Since she became involved in the case in 2016, following Judge Willis's retirement at the Manitowoc County Courthouse, the case got passed off to a judge from neighboring Sheboygan County, Angela Suckowitz. She has a reputation for being a terrible judge and unfair judge. She was the subject of an unflattering investigative article produced by the USA Today Network, Wisconsin's investigative reporter Eric Liedtke, who is the state's leading reporter when it comes to analyzing Wisconsin's judicial system. One of Liedtke's pieces revealed Suckowitz had an astonishing record that no judge should be proud of. She was the fourth most substituted judge in the entire state of Wisconsin. An amazing feat because she isn't even one of the state's most populated counties. Being the subject of repetitive substitution requests illustrates that the judge is not considered fair and not considered a knowledgeable person when it comes to interpreting the law. In other words, she's basically known as a hack judge. Lazy and uninformed, not an exemplary member of Wisconsin's judiciary. Is there anybody that's okay? When it came to Avery's case, Suckowitz made it clear in her rulings that this was not a case to which she wanted to devote considerable time and attention. When she issued her first ruling on October 3, 2017, rejecting Avery's post-conviction appeal, her entire review of Zellner's motions and exhibits was less than 6 pages long. Quote, "The reports submitted by the defendant are equivocal in their conclusions and do not establish an alternative interpretation of the evidence," unquote, Judge Suckowitz's ruling states. Quote, "Given the totality of the evidence submitted at trial and the ambiguous conclusions as stated in the experts' reports, it cannot be said that a reasonable probability exists that a different result would be reached at a new trial based on these reports." Finally, in light of the discussion of the evidence above and the conclusion with relation to the ability to appeal and venue for an appeal, the defendant has failed to establish any grounds that would trigger the right to a new trial in the interests of justice. As such, no further consideration will be given to this issue, unquote. Wisconsin's Court of Appeals later kicked the case back to Judge Suckowitz after determining the lower court judge still needed to address an item Zellner had raised in her post-conviction motion regarding the computer disk Kratz had withheld from Buting and Strang regarding the violent pornography on Bobby the Killer Dassey's computer. Realizing she got stuck with a stinker of an elected judge, Zellner filed a motion on June 14, 2018, asking Judge Suckowitz to step aside from the case. Quote, "Moreover, for the convenience of the judiciary, the parties and witnesses, Mr. Avery respectfully requests that this case be reassigned to a judge in Manitowoc County," unquote, Zellner said. The record, evidence, and many of the witnesses in this matter are located in Manitowoc. All pleadings are filed with the clerk of the Circuit Court of Manitowoc. In short, at this juncture, holding further proceedings in Manitowoc before a Manitowoc judge would be the most efficient use of judicial resources. At this juncture, in Mr. Avery's case, all of the prior reasons for holding the legal proceedings outside of Manitowoc no longer exist. Mr. Avery respectfully requests a substitution of judge in accordance with Wisconsin Statute 801.58, unquote. Judge Suckowitz ruled the motion before her was premature. I can't stand her either. Sexy girlfriend has a day off of work. Miley is like never off of work, ever. Hello, Miley. She explained the Court of Appeals had kicked the case back to her to make a decision in regard to the new evidence, namely the CD. However, it was clear that under no circumstances did Judge Suckowitz want to allow Zellner's side to present evidence and call witnesses in her courtroom. Instead, the Sheboygan judge had two objectives. One, being to prolong Avery's case on her court docket as long as practical, and secondly, to ensure that the state of Wisconsin, namely the Office of Attorney General Brad Schimmel, did not, under any circumstances, lose the case. Hello, Marie. Finally, on September 6, 2018, Judge Sudkowitz issued an 11-page ruling, again rejecting Zellner's bid for a new trial related to the Brady violation allegations surrounding the violent pornography computer disk Fassbender and Kratz chose to withhold from Buting and Strang as they prepared for trial, and were trying to build a strong case for a third-party alternative suspect defense. Quote, "This matter is back before this court for a limited review pursuant to an order from the Court of Appeals," unquote, the judge wrote. Quote, "The defendant alleges that the prosecution withheld a CD created from a seized computer drive and that the failure to turn over this item of discovery directly impacted the defense in both the trial and appellate courts," unquote. Yep, that's fact. In her final analysis, Judge Sudkowitz concluded, quote, "In order for the defendant to establish that there was a Brady violation in a criminal prosecution, the defendant must prove that evidence was suppressed by the state. In this case, the defendant fails on the first burden," unquote. It's just so unbelievable. In embarrassing fashion, the judge's written ruling showed her true colors and how little she even knew about Teresa's murder case. In her September 8, 2018 ruling, Judge Angie Sudkowitz referred to the seized computer in question as being the computer of, and this is bolded, Brandon Dassey. As everyone familiar with the case knows, the 16-year-old nephew's name is Brendan Dassey, not, and now this is bolded, Brandon Dassey. Quote, "I believe we have an excellent chance of getting Mr. Avery's case reversed on appeal," unquote, Zellner assured this author. Quote, "It is much easier to get a case reversed for a hearing than to get a reversal of an adverse ruling after an evidentiary hearing," unquote. In Avery's case, Judge Sudkowitz staunchly refused to grant Zellner a chance to present evidence to show why the defendant should be granted a second trial. For that reason, Zellner is upbeat and positive. On September 8, 2018, Zellner proclaimed on her Twitter account, quote, "So far, only one judge has ruled on Avery. At least 10 more will review before a final decision is made on this evidence. If he is not freed, we will file again, never going to end until he is free," unquote. At one point in time, before Zellner's involvement on Avery's case, Judge Sudkowitz was simultaneously handling Mr. Avery's post-conviction motion in 2013 and the Halbach family's wrongful death lawsuit against Mr. Avery. Quote, "Judge Willis immediately recused himself from the wrongful death lawsuit when he was given these dual assignments. Judge Sudkowitz kept both cases and then delayed the voluntary dismissal of the wrongful death case of the Halbachs until Mr. Avery finally filed a motion complaining about her failure to dismiss, despite the Halbachs' requests to do so. She quickly granted the voluntary dismissal after Mr. Avery's motion to the appellate court was filed," unquote, Zellner said. But it's also Judge Sudkowitz's ties to Kratz that has Zellner concerned about justice and fairness for her client. Even though Kratz became an outcast in Wisconsin's legal community, there are still a number of lawyers and judges who worked with him over the years who don't want to rock the boat or say anything disparaging about Swit. Quote, "We are aware that Judge Sudkowitz sat on the Wisconsin Crime Victims' Rights Board as a private citizen with former prosecutor Ken Kratz," unquote, Zellner said. "We attempted to have another judge substituted for her, but she denied our motion as being premature. We will refile that motion if the appellate court reverses her dismissal of the Avery post-conviction motion. Her dismissal orders fail to address the vast majority of issues we raised, unquote. In preparation for this book's publication, Zellner told this true crime author, quote, "It is impossible to predict how long it will take to get the conviction reversed. The case was dead in the water for 11 years when I came on board. I think it is remarkable all of the evidence we have uncovered despite the significant lapse of time," unquote. Overall, Zellner is very proud of what her team has accomplished in less than 3 full years on Avery's case, starting on it from scratch. Sooner or later, other courts, other more sophisticated judges, other more experienced judges will take notice. Quote, "We have demonstrated that all of the state's forensic evidence used to convict Mr. Avery is flawed because none of this evidence can be replicated," she said. "By that, I mean the blood was selectively dripped in the RAV4. Neither the quantity or location of the blood came from an actively bleeding finger," unquote. The bullet used to persuade jurors of Avery's guilt is another major component of Zellner's quest to prove her client got convicted on manufactured evidence. Quote, "The bullet with Teresa's DNA on it did not go through her head or any part of her body," unquote, Zellner said convincingly. Quote, "The quantity of DNA on the key and hood latch shows it was planted. No human body was ever burned in Mr. Avery's burn pit. The license plates and electronic devices were easy to plant. If the results of a scientific study cannot be duplicated, the results are considered invalid. The same principle applies here to the state's forensic evidence. It cannot be replicated," unquote. Chapter 29. Bobby's Killer's Garage. When Strang and Buting were preparing for trial, they had retained the services of Pete Bates, the retired Illinois police detective whose claim to fame was that he was involved in the congressional investigation of James Earl Ray surrounding the 1968 assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. After retiring from law enforcement, Bates moved back to his native Manitowoc County. However, the defense was handicapped at trial because Kratz had failed to turn over the computer disk with the violent pornography on Bobby Dassey's computer. As a result, Strang and Buting were unable to aggressively present a convincing case pointing the finger at Bobby Dassey as the more likely killer of Teresa Halbach. Bates has remained unwavering in his belief that the most likely people involved in Teresa's murder and dismemberment were Bobby Dassey and Scott Taddock. In 2016, he reached out and spoke with Kathleen T. Zellner about his suspicions and never heard back from the firm. Then, in 2018, he got a call out of the blue. It was Zellner. Bates told the author that Taddock had apparently become paranoid since Zellner has aggressively put him and Bobby under the microscope. Bates said he learned from Zellner that Taddock is making sure he picks up all of his cigarette butts for fear that somebody would retrieve them since he could leave his DNA on them. And let me again point out, that all comes from Carla. This is a claim that Carla is making because Carla was saying at the first rally when she and Barb hated each other, and Carla was desperate to make Scott guilty. Carla was saying she was going to pick up Scott's cigarette butts so they could be tested. And so that's when this whole thing came out. And then Carla's minions were then saying they witnessed Scott picking up the cigarette butts. Did it truly happen? I don't know. I just know it comes from Carla. And if it comes from Carla, it's suspect. Quote, "The background we had done on him is that we had an individual who had no respect for women, and he was aggressive with them," unquote, Bates said. Quote, "He is what we cops would call an asshole," unquote. Bates said the story presented at trial suggesting that Teresa's body was burned in Avery's outdoor burn pile pit was preposterous. Bates said the burn pit was almost on top of the garage, and if the flames got as high as Taddock testified at trial, the entire garage would have gone up in flames, and the propane gas tank that was also nearby likely would have caught fire and caused a great explosion. Bates said that any old school detective, someone familiar with flames and burning trash, would have realized Teresa's body was incinerated inside of a 50-gallon steel drum. Nobody in their right mind would have taken the chance of simply tossing the body outside because the weather elements are too unpredictable. The use of a burn barrel would allow the killer to conceal the crime because nobody would see there was a body inside unless they physically walked to the barrel and peered inside. And the fact remains, several of Teresa's bones were recovered from the bottom of Bobby's burn barrel and nobody else's, Bates said. Although Bates suspects the police from Manitowoc County were involved in rampant evidence planting and manufacturing during the case against Avery, he also doubted the notion that the scattered bones found at Avery's burn pile pit were put there by the cops. For starters, 2 of the biggest bones that were found turned up on the edge, not within the burn pit itself. Another reason why Bates didn't think the police put the bones there was because of Bear, Avery's mean and vicious junkyard dog. Bates said he had a chance to encounter Bear during his time working as the criminal investigator for Strang and Buting. Bear was the type of dog that would attack and constantly bark if a stranger or prowler ever set foot on Avery's trailer property. The dog was on a metal chain and kept outside. The fact that the dog never went berserk leads Bates to believe that Teresa's bones were transported under the cloak of darkness from Bobby's yard to the burn pile pit where the barrel was spilled. But unknown to Bobby at the time, he failed to remove all of the bones. And that's why some of the bones remained at the bottom of his barrel when it was confiscated by the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office on Sunday, November 6. Bates said there were 2 dubious actions taken by Taddock and Bobby around the time of the crime that also factored into his suspicions that both men had something to do with the killing. The first was Bobby's first statement to the police on November 6. That was when Bobby told Detering he and Taddock both passed each other traveling on State Highway 147, but that the investigator should interview Taddock because Taddock would remember the area where they passed each other going in opposite directions on the 2-lane state highway. Quote, "It was very valuable for them to have a mutual alibi," Bates said. Again, that was so self-serving, unquote. Whoever killed Teresa also dismembered her body, removing her arms, her legs, her torso, Bates said. Most people don't realize that dismembering a body is an extremely messy and nasty job, Bates said. Unlike most of his family, Stephen Avery was not an avid hunter, Bates added, but on the other hand, Bobby and Taddock were both avid hunters, and both men had substantial experience at dismembering the carcass of a dead deer. Both men claimed they were out deer hunting at separate locations around the time of Teresa's murder. However, in the aftermath of Teresa's disappearance, after the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office was becoming a regular presence on Avery Road investigating Teresa's disappearance, it seems Bobby took the initiative to scour the country roads and find a dead deer carcass, throw it into the back of his truck, and bring it home. In addition, he also made it a point to visit one of the local convenience stores to make them aware of the deer carcass he retrieved. He obtained a deer tag, which also generated a paper trail, which was handy to have when the police arrived and sought to question him about the blood spatter in his garage. Picture of his garage. And how he would hang the deer. At 7:33 p.m. on Friday, November 4, authorities were notified that a deer was struck by a car just east of Larrabee. The following morning, the RAV4 was identified on the Avery property. A massive police presence took over Avery Road for the next 8 consecutive days, and when the police opened Bobby's garage to look around, a dead deer carcass was strung up in the air. The deer, Bates said, was another perfect diversion to fool the police. When the police arrived, it appeared as if Bobby was skinning a deer. Quote, "It was BS," Bates said. And if they dismembered the victim there, the police never did any forensic examination of that spot itself. Unquote. Bates suspects Bobby either saw the deer or heard it on the police scanner and ran out to get it as soon as he could. Quote, "It would have been great for covering up the blood," unquote, Bates said. During the murder investigation, the Dasseys made the police aware they had lawfully taken the deer off the road, furnishing a tag they got at the local store to allow them to keep it. Quote, "I think the deer being hit was a propitious? I don't know that word. Incident. The deer gets hit and they take advantage of a situation that would help. They're always thinking of how can we cover up. There's a backup plan, and that's why they got it certified with a tag through the Department of Natural Resources," Bates said. "Everything is covered," unquote. Bates said that dismembering the body inside the garage would be the perfect place to do the dastardly act. The garage would be closed, and it offered the comfort of privacy, unlike taking apart the body out in the woods, for example. Quote, "You do it in your garage. You will be able to control it. That's when it was done, and it was done in those burn barrels," unquote, he said. Josh Radant's affidavit indicates he saw a fire reminiscent of a burning barrel in the area of where Bobby Dassey lived. Quote, "The electronic components of Ms. Halbach were burned in the Dassey burn barrel behind the residence at approximately 4:30 to 5 p.m. That fire was observed in the Dassey burn barrels by Josh Radant," unquote, Zellner's filing states. Bates says he's also pretty sure what was used to take apart Teresa's body. Quote, "I think they used a meat saw," he said. "Actually, dismembering a human body is not an easy task. It's extremely difficult. And if you get to take off the limbs, it's a nasty job. But if you've done this to a deer before, you're comfortable." Unquote. Gross. Here are some of the key events on October 31, 2005 concerning Bobby Dassey's behavior as outlined by Zellner on August 9, 2018. Quote, "Bobby had developed an obsession with Ms. Halbach and on a number of occasions watched her from his residence and commented on her visits the next day. Mr. Avery did not leave the Dassey phone number with AutoTrader because he was waiting for a return call on his cell phone or landline to confirm the appointment. Because Bobby was awake, he would have heard the voicemail message left by Ms. Halbach on the Dassey answering machine at 11:43 a.m. Bobby was the only person who could have listened to Ms. Halbach's voice message to the Dassey residence at 11:43 a.m. and known that Ms. Halbach did not have an address for the appointment." Unquote. Quote, "Bobby lied to the police when he denied knowing that on October 31, 2005, Ms. Halbach was coming to the property." Unquote. Quote, "Bobby told police that he saw Ms. Halbach by her vehicle for approximately 10 seconds. However, Bobby was able to describe Ms. Halbach's clothing, physique, and hairstyle, indicating that he had more direct contact with Ms. Halbach than simply seeing her out of his window for 10 seconds. The Dassey computer internet browsing data indicates that 22 pornographic searches were made on October 31, 2005. Bobby's computer was in use on October 31, 2005, which impeaches his trial testimony that he was asleep from 6:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. The computer was used to access the internet on October 31, 2005 at 6:05 a.m., 6:28 a.m., 6:31 a.m., 7 a.m., 9:33 a.m., 10:09 a.m., 1:08 p.m., and 1:51 p.m. As Ms. Halbach left the property, Bobby followed her in his Blazer. Ms. Halbach's cell phone records indicate that she had left the Avery property by 2:41 p.m. and headed west on State Highway 147 and south on County Highway Q. It was established at trial that Ms. Halbach frequently did hustle shots. Because Bobby lied about following Ms. Halbach from the Avery property, he most likely is the person who waved her down for a hustle shot. Ms. Halbach was in the area of Cuss Road, so it is a reasonable inference that she stopped her vehicle for the hustle shot at the Cuss Road cul-de-sac. The blood spatter on the inside of the RAV4 cargo door demonstrates that a struggle ensued between Ms. Halbach and her attacker. The dog alerts indicate that Ms. Halbach was in the area of the suspected burial site for a period of time where she may have been assaulted." Unquote. The scientific testing by Zellner's crew of world-renowned experts validates her position that the killer put Teresa's unconscious body into the back of Teresa's vehicle and drove the sports utility vehicle back to Avery Road near 4 p.m. Quote, "The hair bloodstain patterns were created by Ms. Halbach being placed in the rear cargo area of the RAV4 and her injured head bouncing on the inside panel as the RAV4 was moving. It is a reasonable inference that Ms. Halbach and her vehicle were brought back to the Avery salvage yard after she left the property the first time." Unquote. There are two supporting eyewitnesses who back up her theory. One individual is John Larriquin, who was a propane truck driver for Valders Co-op who spent time on Avery's property on Halloween. He was called as a defense team witness by Strang and Buting. He testified matter-of-factly that, quote, "a vehicle similar to Ms. Halbach's drove past him at 3:45 to 3:50 p.m. Mr. Larriquin was uncertain whether the driver was male or female or which direction the vehicle turned as it exited the Avery property." Unquote. During the trial, Larriquin testified he loaded his propane truck for commercial and residential customer deliveries, quote, "on the southeast corner of Avery Road and 147, unquote. His work schedule was 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. Buting, quote, "Now on October 31, 2005, do you recall seeing any particular vehicle that later it became of interest to you?" Yes, I recall seeing a green SUV, a mid-sized SUV, not the large size, it was smaller." "Okay, so tell us what you saw." "I seen a vehicle pass by the front of my truck, and I just glanced up, and it was a green SUV, and that's all." "Well, which direction was it going?" "Back towards Avery Road, so that would be to the north. I mean, towards 147. It was leaving." Unquote. When asked on the witness stand if he was, quote, "a friend of the Averys," unquote, the witness testified, quote, "no." "Did you happen to see which direction that green SUV went when it got to the intersection of Highway 147? "No, I didn't pay attention." Unquote. That same afternoon, 16-year-old Brendan Dassey and older brother Blaine arrived home on their yellow school bus. Quote, "I do not have any personal knowledge of who made the appointment with Auto Trader to have my mother's van photographed, but I did help clean the van so that it could be sold," unquote, Blaine Dassey said. Quote, "On October 31, 2005, when the school bus driver brought Brendan and me home as we traveled west on State Highway 147, I saw Bobby on State Highway 147 in a bluish or greenish vehicle heading towards Mishicot. Bobby was not driving his black Blazer. Bobby was not home the rest of the evening while I was home." Unquote. Blaine's affidavit also addressed the dark internet searches made from the Dassey personal computer, the one that his mother hired someone to reformat as the murder case was widening in early 2006. Quote, "There was only one computer at the residence and it was always in Bobby's room, sitting near a desk. The computer had a password. The computer had an AOL dial-up internet connection. Bobby was the primary user of the computer. At no time did I ever do searches for pornographic images or words related to pornography, words related to violence, words related to death, words related to mutilations, words related to torture, words related to guns. Sorry. Or knives, words related to Teresa Halbach, words related to Stephen Avery, words related to DNA, or words related to dead, mutilated, or dismembered female bodies, unquote. Blaine Dassey's sworn statement indicates the only time he used the computer was for homework and occasionally to send instant messages to people. Quote, at no time did I ever create a folder for Teresa Halbach, my Uncle Stephen, DNA, or news stories on the murder, unquote. On August 9, 2018, in her 32nd month representing Avery, Zellner unveiled to Wisconsin's criminal justice system how she suspects the murder was orchestrated and why the property next to Avery was the real site of suspicion. Quote, it is a reasonable inference that Ms. Halbach was shot by Bobby's .22 LR because Scott Toddock attempted to sell Bobby's .22 LR the next week to a fellow employee at the Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry. The Dassey garage was never luminoled or checked for forensic evidence of any type. However, blood, which was never tested, was found between the Dassey garage and residence. Unquote. As far as the victim's vehicle, Zellner argues it was backed into Bobby's garage and then it was dumped by a tree near the Mishicot Dam. On Halloween, before sunset, eyewitness Paul Burdick remembers he saw the vehicle on Halloween. Witness Kevin Romlow saw the RAV4 in the same spot over the next few days, including November 2 and 3. The distance to the old dam is 1.7 miles, a 20 to 30 minute walk, according to Zellner. Zellner has submitted to the court the police statement of Bobby's mother, who was questioned about the deer carcass back on November 6, 2005, which was 2 days after the deer was killed. However, her statement gave the police the impression the deer was hit on November 3, when that was clearly not the case. Quote, Barbara Yonda told the agents that her son, Bobby, had gotten a deer and that a deer carcass was hanging in Yonda's garage. Barbara stated that the deer was gutted out and skinned. Barbara told agents that the deer hanging in her garage had been roadkill, which Bobby had received Thursday evening, November 3, 2005. Unquote. The statement goes on to explain that mother and son gutted the deer at the site where it was killed. Quote, after Bobby gutted the deer, Barbara and Bobby went to 310 Mobile, located near Mishicot and Manitowoc on Highway 310, in order to register the deer. After they hung the deer up, Barbara and Bobby skinned the deer the same night. Barbara told the agents that the deer has not moved from where they had hung it since that time. Barbara told the agents that they only took the inner tenderloins out while the deer was hanging in Barbara's garage, unquote. Quote, it is a reasonable inference that Ms. Halbach was dismembered in the Dassey garage because of Bobby's attempt to conceal evidence by hanging a deer in the Dassey garage and lying about the time frame of when that happened, unquote. On Halloween, the victim's body was put into one of the Dassey family burn barrels and taken over to the Manitowoc County gravel pit after dark, Zellner believes. The gravel pit is massive and it's bordered by other gravel pits. Zellner said that her client asserts that Bobby was the only one in the family who regularly hunted inside the county-owned gravel pit, that Bobby knew the terrain and topography, and that he often burned his deer carcass inside a burn barrel. Quote, Ms. Halbach's body was burned in the Dassey burn barrel, and the odor was detected by Travis Groel as he was working on County Highway Q after sunset. Sorry. On October 31, Bobby was 2 hours late leaving for work from the Avery property. He did not leave for work until 11:30 p.m. Once the burning of the body finished at the gravel pit, somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% of the bones and most of the teeth got taken elsewhere for burning, Zellner maintains. Some of her bones were inadvertently dropped on the ground in 3 locations in the Manitowoc gravel pit, unquote. From her review of the Calumet County evidence tag numbers, Zellner realized there were actually 3 separate locations in the county gravel pit where piles of human bones were recovered by the police. Pile 1 was where the charred pelvic bones were found. However, there was a great distance within the quarry from pile 1 to piles 2 and 3. Pile 1 was 474 yards away from pile 2. The distance from pile 1 to pile 3 was 518 yards. On the other hand, the human bones found in pile 2 and 3 were much closer to each other, a distance of only 48 yards apart. Zellner said she discovered the existence of the 2 other human bone piles, in addition to the one with the pelvic bones, after analyzing the evidence tags. The tags contained identifiers for where the bones were found as part of the DCI's investigative police report that was reviewed by Dr. Leslie Eisenberg, the state's forensic anthropologist, who testified for the prosecution at Avery's trial. The realization that there were multiple sites within the quarry with charred human bones has Zellner convinced that someone was attempting to scatter the bones there by dumping them out of a burn barrel under the cover of darkness. However, the barrel was put back on Bobby's property, still containing a number of charred human bones of Teresa. On November 3, news broke about Teresa's disappearance, and Avery told Bobby and others about Sergeant Colburn's visit to Avery Road to question Avery. At that time, Avery's middle finger injury from 2 weeks earlier had busted open. Quote, when Mr. Avery left the property to go to Menards, Bobby entered Mr. Avery's trailer and wiped up blood from Mr. Avery's sink. He transported the blood to the RAV4 and selectively dripped the blood into Ms. Halbach's vehicle in order to frame Mr. Avery for the murder. Bobby was the only one who could have planted Mr. Avery's blood in the sink during the crucial time period before the blood complexly coagulated, unquote. It's an undeniable fact that Avery saw taillights by his trailer shortly after he and his brother Chuck headed over to Menards. Quote, it could only have been the taillights from Bobby's vehicle that Mr. Avery saw by his trailer because no one else could have driven to Mr. Avery's trailer in that time frame. Bobby is the only family member of the Avery property who is present and had access to the blood dripped in Mr. Avery's sink on November 3, 2005, unquote. There was also the physical injuries to Bobby's body. Quote, Bobby had scratches on his upper back in close proximity to the time of the murder that were consistent with human fingernails, unquote, Zellner argues. She provided the police photographs that were taken, another typo, were taken the medical examination room of Bobby's back the week after Teresa disappeared. In November 2017, Dietering was brought out of retirement and made a special investigator on the case to help the state of Wisconsin, which remains in a win-at-all-costs mode in regard to keeping their convictions of Avery and Brendan intact. When Dietering questioned Bobby during an interview about the computer and the violent pornography, Bobby claimed it wasn't him. He also told Dietering the personal computer was not even kept inside his bedroom. Quote, in Bobby's 2017 re-interview by the police, he denied that the computer was in his bedroom, even though the crime scene video shows the computer in his bedroom, unquote, Zellner found. Zellner said the computer forensic evidence shows in convincing fashion that Bobby gave false testimony during the trial, claiming he was still sound asleep until 2 p.m. and woke up shortly after Teresa rolled up to photograph his mom's van. She said her investigator, Steve Kirby, interviewed Bobby in 2017 and confronted him about all of the violent pornography on the computer. She also said he remained steadfast to his story that he was watching from the distance inside his kitchen window as Teresa walked over to Stephen Avery's red trailer and that he never saw her again. Quote, he stuck with his story. He was given a chance to admit he was pressured by the cops, and he would not, Zellner said. That's because the lie is his. It isn't a cop lie. It's his lie. He made it up on November 5, 2005, and he stuck with it ever since, unquote. When asked about the hardcore violent pornography, quote, my investigator confronted him and he looked ill. He looked like he wanted to throw up, Zellner said. It's the only thing they talked to him about that elicited some display of emotion, unquote. Zellner said she has been recognized by other lawyers, including prosecutors, for her credibility and willingness to work hand in hand with the other side. She said she has had a long-standing policy and made it clear to the prosecution side that they can interview her client in post-conviction process, with the only stipulation being that she can be present during the line of questioning. She said that many prosecutors have taken her up on her offer because she realized they were interested in fairness and justice. However, in Avery's case, she has always gotten the cold shoulder treatment from the police involved in the Avery case. She said nobody from the state of Wisconsin team of the Attorney General has reached out to her in hopes of re-interviewing Avery about the case or the other people she has identified as the more likely culprits, Bobby Dassey and Scott Taddock. Quote, we have recently luminoled the Dassey garage and collected buccal swabs for DNA testing because the police failed to do this, unquote, Zellner told the author on October 4, 2018. Quote, there was a blood drop collected between the Dassey garage and house, which was never tested, the most damning evidence linking Bobby Dassey to the crime. In addition to the multiple lies he has told, is the presence of Halbach's bones in the Dassey burn barrel, which Bobby used frequently to burn deer remains. Ms. Halbach was dismembered and burned in a burn barrel, according to Dr. John DeHaan and Dr. Stephen Symes. The timing of the crime makes the Dassey garage a place of interest that has to be considered as the site of the murder and mutilation of Ms. Halbach, unquote. In 2017, authorities in Wisconsin started to become jittery about the prospect of having their murder conviction against Avery fall apart. In other states, such as Nebraska, it's quite common for the Attorney General to call upon an outside police agency to conduct an independent, and now he's talking about another case, don't care, blah, blah, blah. But with Zellner making the waves rise in Wisconsin, the state's response was to bring John Dietering of the Calumet County Sheriff's Office out of retirement and appoint him to be a special investigator. It seems clear that his role on the case was to maintain the status quo, to make sure Avery and his nephew remained vilified, and that suspicions swirling toward Bobby Dassey and Scott Taddock are minimized or downplayed. In other words, Dietering's task wasn't to re-examine the case with a critical eye, to investigate allegations of evidence planting against some of his longtime work colleagues, such as Mark Wiegert. Dietering knew what he needed to do, report back to Wiegert and the Wisconsin Attorney General Brad Schimmel with words and written reports of reassurance. But reading between the lines, Dietering's 62-page report makes it obvious which items he and the others who are interested in the preservation of their cases against Avery and Brendan Dassey are deeply concerned about regarding Zellner's probe into the crucial pieces of overlooked evidence from their investigation in 2005. Quote, Radant was asked about the lights that he mentioned in the Manitowoc County pit. Radant stated they were large searchlights. Radant was asked about the pelvic bones. Radant stated that attorney Kathleen Zellner's team, or the media, mentioned the pelvic bones. Radant stated he was never made aware of any pelvic bones by law enforcement, unquote. Detering also interviewed Ryan Hilgas, the ex-boyfriend of Teresa, who has also been mentioned at times as a possible suspect in her death. Quote, I asked Ryan about the damage to the left front directional assembly of Teresa's RAV4. Ryan indicated he could not recall who he had spoken with or where he had gotten the information he relayed to Special Agent Tom Fassbender in 2005 regarding the damage and the insurance claim. Ryan stated it was unknown to him who told him about the damage or the claim. I then displayed photographs of the damaged area and the damage directional to him, but the photographs did not jog his memory, unquote. Another interview involved Brian Dassey, the older brother of Bobby Dassey and the other Dassey boys. He was 20 at the time of the killing. Quote, Brian indicated that the reason he did not spend any time around his mother, Barbara Yanda's residence, was that he could not stand Scott Tadek and was not happy with his mother's conduct of still being married while being involved with Scott. Brian stated he spent enough time at his mother's residence to clean up and then leave on the majority of the days. I asked Brian if he could remember what day the deer carcass was placed in the Dassey garage, and he indicated he could not remember, unquote. Finally, it was time to question Scott Tadek. Detering teamed up with Wisconsin DCI agent Jeff Wish, and they decided to interview Tadek in a laid-back environment to make Tadek feel at ease and not under pressure. The Subway restaurant on Main Street in Mishicot was chosen as the location. Quote, Scott was asked if he was in any way involved in the homicide of Teresa Halbach, and he indicated, quote, no, not at all, unquote. Scott was specifically asked if he killed anyone, including Teresa Halbach, and his answer was no, unquote. Well, then that solves it. He said no. No need to do anything else. At the time of the killing, Tadek lived at a mobile home on State Highway 147. The property was about 500 yards from where Teresa's SUV was believed to have been put for several days after her disappearance. Here's what Tadek told the two investigators he was doing on Teresa's last day of life. Quote, Scott stated his mother had back surgery at Aurora Bay Care in Green Bay on that date. Scott was unsure if the surgery was in the late or early morning. Scott stated that after visiting his mother, he came back to his residence in Mishicot between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m., but thought closer to 3:30 p.m. Scott then changed into his hunting clothes and went hunting. Scott stated after hunting, he changed out of his hunting clothes and went to pick up his girlfriend at the time, who is now his wife, Barbara. Scott stated he and Barbara then went back to the hospital in Green Bay to visit his mother some more, unquote. As the interview dragged on, another question came up regarding Teresa. Quote, Scott was asked if he knew or ever met Teresa Halbach, and he denied knowing or having ever met her, unquote. It became apparent Detering's interview had less to do with questioning Tadek about whether he helped conceal Teresa's bones or conspired with Bobby Dassey. The only question concerned their relationship. Quote, Scott stated he gets along okay with Bobby Dassey, unquote. Detering mostly wanted to talk about Avery to help reinforce his side's justification for keeping Avery locked away from the outside world. Quote, Scott went on to indicate that Stephen controlled and ruined the Avery family life in the 2 years that Stephen was out of prison, unquote. Quote, Scott was asked if he had done anything that would minimize Stephen's involvement, such as fudging statements that he indicated, and he indicated he had not, unquote. Curiously, Dietering and his tag-along did not ask Tadek the very same question about Bobby Dassey. The interview took a weird twist when Tadek, at the request of the two police, summoned his wife to the subway to speak with them as well. Their questions to her concerned the desktop computer inside her home. Quote, Barbara was asked about files on the computer titled Teresa Halbach and DNA. Barbara stated she knew nothing about the files. Barbara stated she had never seen them and had no idea who would have created the files. Barbara denied seeing the page that showed Stephen and Teresa together, unquote. Dietering sought to pepper her with a barrage of questions about Zellner. Quote, Barbara was asked how many times Attorney Zellner had been out to the Avery property. Barbara stated she was unsure of how many times Attorney Zellner had been at the property, and at this point, Scott indicated this is pretty hush-hush, unquote. Minutes later, with her husband sitting with her at the subway, she was asked why the country's foremost leading expert in exposing wrongful convictions would be focusing so much attention on people close to her. Quote, Barbara was asked why she thinks Attorney Zellner is pointing the finger at Bobby and Scott, and she indicated she did not know why. Barbara indicated that she never actually provided any evidence to Attorney Zellner concerning this matter, unquote. Back in 2005, Dietering didn't bother to take steps to corroborate Tadek's alibi, claiming he had spent much of the day at the hospital in Green Bay. Now, with Zellner lighting fire on the case 12 years later, Dietering realized he needed to follow up on some of his shortcomings. On November 14, 2017, he contacted Aurora Bay Care Security in Green Bay. Quote, I asked the representative whether there would be any existing video of the parking area or any other video from 2005. The representative indicated no videos exist from 2005 as their hard drive records override existing video every couple of months, unquote. Zellner spent nearly 3 entire years dissecting the murder investigation before introducing evidence showing why she believes Bobby Dassey and Scott Tadek were involved in the murder and or dismemberment of the body. 12 years after conducting his first interview of Bobby Dassey, Dietering went back to question Bobby, now 31. But this was hardly an interrogation. The interview took place on Bobby's terms, in a friendly setting, at his house on Horse Road in Mishicot. In fact, Dietering finished in only 50 minutes. Zellner's filings to the Wisconsin's courts have made repeated assertions that Bobby has lied repeatedly to the police and during his trial testimony. When Dietering re-interviewed him with Jeff Wish of the DCI on November 17, 2017, quote, we asked Bobby if he would be honest and truthful with us, unquote. In 2005, just 5 days after Teresa vanished, Bobby claimed remembering passing Tadek on the highway, which would have been around the time of Teresa's violent attack. But he urged them to interview Tadek because he would be able to remember exactly where the two passed each other and waved. Now, with Zellner hot on his trail, the same question came up again, a dozen years later. Bobby, who was foggy before, now had a clear response. Quote, Bobby stated he saw Scott Tadek on Highway 147 in the area of Jumbo Creek Road. Bobby stated there is a large gravel pit in that area. Bobby stated he met Scott at approximately 3 p.m., unquote. Questions turned to the sequence of events involving Teresa's visit to Avery Road, the last place she was seen alive. Well, I should say allegedly. Quote, Bobby stated after he had awoken to go deer hunting, he looked out the front window of his mother's residence and saw Teresa's vehicle parked opposite to a van that his mother was going to sell. Bobby stated the lady got out, started taking pictures, and at this point he got ready to take a shower before hunting. Bobby stated the lady was alone. Bobby stated he spent a couple of minutes in the shower and then got dressed and looked out the window again and saw the lady walking towards Stephen's trailer. Bobby stated he did not see Stephen during this encounter. Bobby stated he spent maybe a couple of seconds looking out the window, and during this time she was halfway to Stephen's trailer. Bobby stated he then went out to his vehicle and he did not see her when he got in his vehicle. Bobby stated he had no idea who she was, so he really did not pay a lot of attention, unquote. Which we all know is absolutely not true. Even if Bobby was innocent, which he's not, Bobby's the killer. He was obsessed with Teresa Halbach. So he would have been watching her the entire time he had that opportunity. There's no stopping to go shower. If he needs to jerk it because he's looking at her, he would have been doing it while he was looking at her out the window. No need to go to the shower to do it. There is no way he stopped watching that girl as long as she was there. He was also questioned about his prior contacts and observations of Teresa. After all, she was a regular at Avery Salvage, having been there if he had ever met or knew Teresa. Quote, never, unquote. Another question was asked if he knew Teresa was arriving on October 31. Nope. That's a freaking lie. Bobby didn't have a compelling answer when reminded that Brian Dassey, his older brother, had given a statement to police back in November 2005 suggesting Bobby saw Teresa leave on Avery Road. Quote, Bobby was asked why Brian would say something like this, and Bobby responded, your guess is as good as mine, unquote. At this point, Detering was obviously aware that Zellner was poking holes in the state's case concerning the dark secrets hidden on the Dassey computer, the one that was the subject of morbid, sadistic, violent pornography searches, only at times of the day when Bobby was home alone. Had Bobby used the internet and the computer, they asked him? Quote, if I did, it wasn't often, unquote, he answered. Quote, Bobby stated he thought the computer was on a desk in the living room at the time, unquote. A police video captured by Detering's colleague, Sergeant Bill Tyson, after Teresa vanished, conclusively showed the tower computer stationed at a desk in Bobby's own bedroom. Quote, Bobby stated he never downloaded any pornography. Bobby stated he may have watched porn at some point on it, but I don't know. Quote, Bobby stated there were 5 guys with access to the computer, and he doesn't know if they would have downloaded or viewed pornography. Bobby identified his brothers Blaine, Brendan, Brian himself, and Tom Yonda as being the individuals with access to the computer. Bobby stated he did not use the computer much as he was working third shift at the time, unquote. At that point in time, Brian had a room in the basement. Blaine and Brendan shared a room, and Bobby had his own room. Regarding the computer, the questions persisted. Quote, Bobby was asked if he knew who created the folder with the page depicting Stephen and Teresa's photographs. Bobby indicated he knew how to create folders, but he had no idea as to who created those folders, unquote. Questions about 3 specific computer folders then arose. There was a Teresa folder, a Halbach folder, and a DNA folder. Quote, Bobby was specifically asked who created Teresa and Halbach and DNA folders that were on the computer, and he stated he had no idea who did this. Bobby was asked if he did it, and he indicated no, unquote. So, that settles that. Let's just listen to him. Finally, the topic of Cuss Road, which was about a half-mile away from Avery Salvage, also came up during Bobby's follow-up interview in 2017. This was the spot where, back in 2005, several cadaver and scent tracking dogs were all led by their noses to this desolate, seldom-traveled road that was just over the other side of the Verdant gravel pits behind Avery Salvage. Quote, Bobby was unfamiliar with where I was talking about when I mentioned Kuss Road, Dietering's report states. I then produced a map I had from the Josh Rodant interview and showed him where Kuss Road was located. Bobby indicated he had never hunted on the Rodant property or in the gravel pit. Bobby stated he had never hunted on the area off of Kuss Road. Unquote. At no point during the short interview that lasted less than an hour did Dietering and Wish ask Bobby about why Teresa's bones were inside of his burn barrel, the one he used to slice up and burn his dead animal parts that were part of his hunting escapades. They also did not ask him if he had removed the missing blood taken out of his uncle's sink on the night of November 3. Quote, Bobby was asked why he and Scott Taddock were being singled out as suspects, and he indicated, I don't know. Bobby was asked if he had any involvement in the death of Teresa Halbach, and he indicated no. Unquote. Dietering touched on Bobby's testimony against his uncle at the trial, but it was only brief. Quote, I asked Bobby if he had made anything up or had lied during his testimony. Bobby stated everything he said was true, and he had no reason to lie during the trial. Unquote. Of course, on the other hand, if Bobby had culpability in the killing and the gross dismemberment of Teresa's body, he would have every reason under the sun to lie. In 2005, Teresa Halbach had made at least 6 confirmed visits to Avery Salvage to photograph cars being sold. She was there June 20, August 22, August 29, September 19, October 10, and lastly, October 31. Curiously, the Subway restaurant interview of Barbara and Scott Taddock did not bring an end to Wisconsin's reinvestigation of the case. There was still something within Barb's home that Dietering, Wiegert, and others at the Wisconsin Attorney General's office of Brad Schimmel were deeply concerned about. It was a piece of evidence they had scrutinized back in 2006. Now, 11 years later, they didn't know whether it might jeopardize their murder convictions. Quote, after the interview, I returned home to my residence in Michigan. At this time, the investigators requested I turn over my computer tower, which was the same one that was in my home in 2005 and had been examined before. I agreed to turn the computer tower to the investigators, unquote. Why would you still have that? On November 10, 2017, the state of Wisconsin law enforcement authorities seized the Hewlett-Packard Pavilion computer of Barbara Taddock for the second time. The computer was first seized as evidence in 2006. This time, something happened. Something was said that gave Barb pause. Quote, I distinctly remember at the time I turned over the computer tower to the investigators saying, quote, I'm thinking of getting rid of this computer, unquote. After I made the comment, investigator John Dietering replied, quote, that would be a good idea and you should not give the computer to Kathleen Zellner, unquote. Actually, Zellner has undergone a remarkable transformation herself since she received a handwritten letter addressed to her dated September 26, 2011. The letter was brief, only 4 lines long. It was written on a sheet of notepad. Quote, Ms. Zellner, I saw you on a case on TV. I need you to help me on my case. I'm innocent. Please let me know. Thank you, Stephen Avery. Unquote. Not Sandy Greenman. Stephen Avery. 7 years later, in September 2018, Zellner was being honored in Maryville, blah, 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 blah. Quote, he had written to us and we had looked at it from just what the courts had filed, and I saw there was all this forensic science against him, unquote, Zellner remarked. His blood was in his car. His DNA was on her car key in his bedroom. Her bones were in his burn pit. The bullet in his garage had her DNA on it. It's like, quote, whoa. We were like, no way. We don't want to take this case, unquote. Then I watched the documentary and I thought, oh, wait a minute. This forensic stuff is bogus. I can tell by watching it how unbelievably superficial it is. No photographs are even taken when they find the bones. They keep the county pathologist from coming on the property," unquote. And that's essentially how Zellner became involved in Avery's crusade to overturn his murder conviction. Quote, "So I thought, I'm going to hire world-renowned experts. I'm going to do ballistics, blood, and if I dump a ton of money in it, I'm going to do it because I think this guy is innocent. I'm even going to do brain fingerprinting that the CIA does on him," unquote. One of the biggest revelations, according to Zellner, concerns Dr. John DeHaan's analysis of the bones found in Avery's backyard burn pit. And I just have to, something, as I've been reading this, and I know I thought this when I originally bought this book could be so much shorter. He goes over the same things over and over again. That would be my biggest critique of this, that you've already talked about this. It's already, so it just seems like he's really needed to pad this to make this book enough pages to be a book. That it's just over and over the same things. Quote, "So I hired John DeHaan, probably the leading fire forensic expert in the world. And he said, quote, 'There wasn't a body burned in that burn pit. He said there's absolutely no evidence,' unquote. And he's actually burned human bodies more than anybody in the world, which is a weird occupation. But this is the guy that knows. He said a barrel was used and 40% of the bones were tipped into the burn pit. So someone poured bones into the burn pit. He said, quote, 'The teeth are missing.' He said, 'The teeth never melt.' And he said if you had burned at a crematorium level of heat at this burn pit outdoors, you would have burned down the garage and blown up the propane tank. He said you would not sustain the temperature degree for the bones. He said it's totally fabricated. No body burned in there," unquote. And then there was the DNA on the hood latch. Her client's DNA was on the hood latch. Quote, "Guess what we found out? We found out that the amount of DNA on the hood latch is 90 times the quantity that would have been left if a person had just opened a hood latch," unquote. And that led to the quest to take down the elusive swab that had to be taken from Avery and substituted in as the hood latch swab. Quote, "And we found it. They took 2 groin swabs from him when they had arrested him for a gun charge. So we're like, what are you doing groin swabs when somebody's arrested for a gun charge? They pocketed the 2 groin swabs because they knew they would be hypothelial DNA, and they churned those into the crime lab," unquote. But Zellner's favorite find, she said, was dismantling the prosecution's theory that Teresa was shot in the head with a .22 caliber bullet, which was laying in Avery's garage, but they had just missed finding it the first 6 times they searched the garage for hard evidence. Quote, "They couldn't find it, couldn't find it, couldn't find it, couldn't find it. Then they found it, and they said, whoa, it's got her DNA on it," unquote. And then, with the state's permission, Zellner got to bring the bullet to the Microtrace Laboratory, which solved the Unabomber case and numerous airline crashes. Quote, "It's probably the best forensic trace laboratory in the world, and they looked at it under a microscope. Very advanced, sophisticated microscope. Quote, "Oh, that bullet's got red paint on it and wood. So wait a minute, where's the bone? If you shoot a .22 through somebody's head, I don't care how many times you shoot it, the lead is so soft it's like a sponge. It's going to have bone on there." So then I flew to Arizona. I hired Luke Haig. We shot out in the desert .22s through bovine bone, and every single one of them was embedded with bone. So what do we know? We know that .22 was stuck in the Avery wood in the garage, and they just pried that thing out of there. Again, we found her DNA that traced back to what DNA of hers they used to put on there, because it also another typo. It's because this says, because it also wax had on it and they just happened to have her chapstick, unquote. Zellner's message to her legions of supporters all around the world is this: don't lose faith in her. Her quest to undo Avery's murder conviction and regain his freedom still remains in the early steps of the post-conviction appeals process. Quote, it's just staying on it. That's what we did. We're going to be like a wrecking crew with this evidence, and we're going to expose what they thought was a dunk shot case, unquote. On November 6, 2018, Zellner posted the following statement on her Twitter account, which had ballooned to more than 459,700 followers. Quote, it would be so much easier to walk away, close the door, not spend another dime, believe all the unproven allegations, if we could have just duplicated the state's forensic evidence, but neither we nor anyone else can do so. Why? Because he is innocent. Unquote. The end. And then what's left is a whole bunch of pictures. The end. We are done with this John Farrick autographed book. Cat. Oh, he had more contact than a simple window peeky peek. David. Anybody with that kind of content on their computer should be locked away for good with the keys thrown away. Well, it's what they were trying to find on Stephen's computer to try and prove Stephen did it. But there was nothing. But it's on Bobby's computer, and you don't think twice about it. Cat. The book did not need to be X number of pages. It could have been a short novel without all the filler and other cases. Yeah, that's why I just skipped it. Not going to read the other cases. If you want to, and the end of the book actually has chapters of other books that Farrick wrote. So if you're interested in those, you can, read them yourself in the book. But and we finished just a little under 2 hours of Wrecking Crew. Ta-da! All done. Bottom line is there is nothing that proves Stephen or Brendan had anything to do with whatever has happened to Teresa Halbach. Any alleged evidence they have are all tainted. Stephen was never given a fair trial. 2 people from Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department were part of his jury. So he was never going to be found innocent. Best he could have hoped for was a hung jury. There was ineffective assistance of counsel all over the place. I get it that Buting and Strang did not have the everything that Kathleen Zellner has had to help her with the case. But on the computer alone, to just Kratz claim that it's Brendan's computer when you know this is a house that has 4 boys in it, teenagers, and for Kratz to just say the only computer is Brendan's computer and to not look at it yourself, there's no way these poor people, allegedly poor people, living in a trailer would have a computer that only Brendan would use. So for Strang and Buting to just take Kratz's word for it and not look at that computer, ineffective assistance of counsel. There is so much wrong. So much. And so this case needs somebody not associated with the corrupt people, lawyers, cops, judges, none of those people can be a part of a new trial for Stephen. We need people who actually care that Teresa Halbach has not been allegedly seen since Halloween 2005 and want to know what truly happened to Teresa Halbach. You need a state's attorney who will stand up to corruption and not continue to cover for the corrupt blue line. Stephen deserves to just open the door and let him out. But at the very least, he deserves a new trial. No fair trial. If you care about justice, if you care about evidence and facts and science and justice for Teresa Halbach, you would want there to be a new trial. Why were bones that Kratz set in court, not even sure if they're human, don't look at these bones, why were those bones given to the Halbach family? Why did the Halbach family accept bones that aren't Teresa? And what did they do with those bones? Why was evidence given away while Stephen and Brendan rot away in prison? Why is the RAV4 being hidden from Kathleen Zellner? They're covering it up. If you have nothing to hide, you wouldn't hide anything. So sickening. So, all right, calling this to a close. I will be doing a live at some point this week. I don't know if it will be here in Gossip or if we'll do it on Stephen Avery Project, where, it'll be the Ask Jax Anything, where people can say whatever they want about the case. And I'll also address about that I have canceled our rally for personal stuff that I got going on that I just can't make it work. Thank you, David. I don't know for sure when that will be because I have a Zoom meeting that isn't scheduled yet, that is going to be tentatively, it's going to be either tomorrow or Wednesday. And it's because, and I talked about this a little bit on Justice with Jax, Melissa Kaluzinski, a case, I talk about all the time. It's another one of Kathleen's cases. And Kathleen actually tweeted something on Melissa's case the other day. It was nothing major, but I wish Kathleen would tweet more about Melissa's case, because Melissa deserves the same kind of attention that Stephen's case gets. But it was recently in the news here that the prison that Melissa is in, that some of the women there were on a hunger strike due to the poor conditions of the prison. And it was posted by the National Organization for Women, which is known as NOW. And a really good friend of mine is the president of the Illinois chapter of NOW. And so a reporter has been hearing things from inmates of the horrible conditions that's going on there. And so I shared that post on Justice with Jax. And my friend then also had shared it on my page, had tagged me in it. And she's like, we need to do something about this. And I'm like, I've been trying for years, because I visit that prison and I talk with Melissa, and I know that prison is not, people shouldn't be living like that. Um, and so my friend is very upset about it, and she wants to organize something, possibly a protest at the prison. Don't know. There's lawyers that are now involved, and so we're going to have a Zoom meeting, it like either today or tomorrow, to discuss what we want to do about the conditions at Melissa's prison. So once I know for sure when, and what time that is happening, then I'll be able to figure out when for sure I'll have an opening that we can do another live. And on the Justice with Jax page, I'll keep everybody updated on what is going on with the prison. I have to be kind of careful because I don't want Melissa to get punished if I show up at the prison to protest due to the conditions there. So I would want to make sure that hi Shelby, as I'm about to leave. um so I don't know. I'll have to see what happens, but Melissa, I email with Melissa multiple times a week, and just know that Melissa keeps to herself. And especially during this time of COVID, she stays mostly in her room, and because she's not about the drama and all that stuff. So Melissa isn't as affected, but she, like the thing she told me the other day, they do have crap that bubbles up and comes up through the shower drains. Disgusting. But then she also talks about just how disgusting the bathrooms are in general, because the women are just pigs. And Melissa tries to clean up the bathroom, and then the pigs make it disgusting again. So that would still be the prison's fault that they are not keeping it clean. Um, oh, absolutely, Shelby. I totally agree with you. Yeah, Bobby. On his computer, right? The computer in his bedroom. So when I know anything that's going on with Melissa Kaluzinski's prison, I will post that all over in Justice with Jax, because maybe there's something you all can do as well. If it is calling our governor or calling our lieutenant governor. Our lieutenant governor is somebody who, I mean, and I've had conversations with Juliana Stratton, our lieutenant governor, when they were elected, and I'm somebody who worked very hard to get them elected. Her number one priority was criminal justice reform, and she said specifically Logan, because it is our female prison, and also our governor's wife, MK Pritzker. The two of them, I was at an event too where the two of them spoke about, Logan. And I know they've gone and toured Logan, and I've reached out to them numbers of times trying to talk to them over the last 4 years on how bad the conditions are at Logan, and I get nowhere. So maybe having the National Organization for Women now stepping up and getting upset about this, and then this other woman who is a lawyer, maybe something's going to go on that then, yeah, you can write letters or call MK Pritzker or Juliana Stratton or even our governor, JB Pritzker, if we're going to have you target the prison itself. I don't know, but that'll be on Justice with Jax after I have that meeting, and I'll fill you all in. All right, so I'm going to go. We will get the event made as soon as I decide when I'll go live, on whether it's in Gossip or on the Stephen Avery Project public page. So thank you for being here while we read through Wrecking Crew. Oh, and again, if there's another book you think we should read for another story time, you can post your suggestions here in Gossip. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm out. But Investigation continues.